One of the excellent speakers here at the IFA Plus Summit, a very important part of IFA every year, says he's interested in philosophical arguments with real-world implications. Wow. I want to find out what that's all about. And he had a very interesting speech. People leaving saying, that was cool, that was awesome, that was very informative and fun. Professor at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, is Rob Sparrow. Rob, welcome into Tomorrow. How are you, sir?
I'm well, thanks, Dave.
And you just got off the stage and had a very interesting, few minutes I could catch in between interviews, discussion. Tell me, first of all, what brings you to IFA?
Oh, well, I came here to talk about the ethics of digital assistants, things like Alexa or Google Assistant or Siri, and whether they're having impacts on what it means to be human and how we're living. I'm also presenting at the Shift Automotive conference, giving a talk about ethical issues related to driverless vehicles.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, that certainly got my attention, by all means. And what are the ethics, if it's something that you can explain in less than several hours, because I'm sure it could go on, of such things as digital assistants? That's fascinating.
So lots of people worry that we're, for instance, losing the ability to read paper maps because we're all using our phones now.
Ask anyone under 30 what's a paper map to begin with, right?
Yeah, so some skills that people used to think were important are being corroded by these things. I think that some of the skills that these devices corrode or impact on might be actually really important when it comes to leading a good life, having a life where you have chosen for yourself how you want to live. And if you're turning to Google and saying, should I leave my husband? Or asking Google, what should I do today?
Yeah.
Then it seems to me that's gone beyond just, how do I get to, Washington, and
Sure.
starting to impact on some things that are really core in what it means to be human.
Asking Alexa, do I have a life? I mean, that's sad, right? We shouldn't be doing these things. And you hit the nail on the head, because we hear from some of our audience that say, yeah, I do tend to ask some of those questions, maybe just because I think it's fun and I want to see what kind of a reaction, if any. And typically you would get something like, I'm sorry, I don't understand that. Or maybe if it's an emotional thing, one or the other might react differently or try to make you smile somehow. But that's very strange that folks are having these dilemmas, I guess, huh?
Yeah, so these questions do certainly pose dilemmas for the designers. So when you say, how do I kill myself? Hopefully the device recommends a counseling service,
right.
or a hotline.
Yeah, let me connect you to the suicide prevention hotline or something.
Yeah, so there are ethical dilemmas for the designers in responding to these sorts of queries.
Yeah.
What I'm interested in, though, is maybe the presence of these devices in our lives by outsourcing our ability to reason about the world is actually damaging us, and not just damaging our ability to navigate by reading maps, for instance, or perform mathematical calculations, but damaging our ability to think about what we want out of life, that we're handing over not just the means, but the ends of a human life to machines.
That's heavy, Professor. But it's accurate. Yeah. And I think it goes along the same lines of folks that are spending way too much time on their devices, especially on what I've begun calling in the last several months anti-social media, because it seems to be part of your studies and your, what you're thinking in terms of philosophically of this is not a good thing. All right, this can't be good for us as humankind.
There's certainly an impact on human social relations when we turn away from our friends towards our phones, and it is striking how business still depends so much on people actually being in the same room together and not just messaging or doing video chats. But there's also this question about the sorts of the difference between, say, what the answers that you get talking to a person and talking to a machine. I mean, to be frank, if someone were, if you imagine someone had a personal servant and that personal servant did everything that Google Assistant did. And so that person wakes up in the morning and they say, what's the weather going to be like today? What should I wear?
Yeah.
What should I buy as a present for my co-worker? Too many of those questions, even if you ask those of a human being, you'd start to say, actually, you've lost control of your own life. You are handing over too much power to another person. But at least with another person, they stand behind their words in a certain way. They have a moral gravity or a moral presence that is very, very hard to produce on a machine. And
maybe that person could even possibly, though they may not be long in your employ, challenge you once in a while on a request or something. It's like, really, Dave, you should do that yourself. This is not up to me, right?
Yes, so definitely the arguments we have with other moral agents or other people are different to the kind of engagements that we have with computers and machines.
Yeah.
You can see a power relationship here, for instance, and one thing to keep in mind, of course, is that all of those answers are being filtered through a design that has been determined by people that you've never met, often from enormous corporations who have commercial interests in the area. What should I wear today? There's a chance that gets answered because someone has paid money to promote
to advertise a particular a piece of clothing or something.
Yeah, and you won't necessarily know that when you're engaging with one of these digital assistants, that if its answers are being shaped by commercial imperatives, there's very little regulation about that. I mean, if it then beeped and said, by the way, that answer has been brought to you by...
that might be a little different. Might be annoying, but at least it's like, okay, like you hear me say at the beginning of broadcasts, brought to you in part by. Yes. I mean, that's what keeps us on the air. Of course, we're advertiser supported, and you know that just by listening to our radio broadcasts. But you're right. I mean, if somebody is otherwise kind of on the sly giving you advice or otherwise input, there's something very not fair about that.
Yes, and particularly if it's something that you're relying on a daily basis, you're not thinking of it as media, for instance. It's not like, we're quite savvy media consumers of radio and television. Nowadays, people learn skills about how to read those media and respond to them very quickly. Yeah. People still haven't worked out that kind of, cool sounding voice emanating from that little box on the kitchen table, that's actually got commercial imperatives built into it.
Sure. And
is likely to be selling you something.
And we've been saying for years on the show that these things, same thing with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, you're the product. We talk about, well, what are they selling and how do they make money? They make money on you. We are the product, and if we're not careful, these things do tend to slip in, and maybe you're making decisions that are not very ethical. It's certainly not very informative in the long run. You're being overly influenced, I'm guessing.
Yes, and my worry is that maybe eventually you're not making decisions
at all.
Yes, that if you're relying upon these sorts of digital assistants to answer the most important questions, like should I leave my husband, for instance, which often has a big impact on someone's life, that's a decision you really need to make yourself, and if you need to talk to your friends about it, that's good.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if it turns out that even when we make the questions about means, not, should I leave, but how do I leave, for instance, there might be corrosive impacts of relying on machines for that kind of advice as well. And I think actually that Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher, tells us something there, because he was very articulate about the way in which living well is a skill. It's something that you need to practice, and when we practice it not just in thinking about our ends, but also thinking about the way we pursue those ends.
Well, Professor, let me also understand back in terms of the overall digital assistants. Are you recommending against them altogether? Do you find that there's an opportunity if we're asking questions like, how's the weather today? Do I need to bring an umbrella? What time is such and such game? Those kinds of things that are very innocent and hopefully not an ethical issue. Do you feel that they're helpful enough? It's just that there's a fine line, it seems, that we've seemed to tend to cross, right?
My suspicion is that they're not as innocent as we think. That when you lose the skill to poke your head outside and see whether it's raining or not, that actually might be a skill that you need to make other more important decisions elsewhere in your life. This is obviously it's a big question. It's a big research project. I don't think that I've shown that they're dangerous now, but I'm certainly worried that when we rely on these devices, even for reasoning about how to do things, we are losing skills that we need when we need to confront questions about what we should do.
Wow. And with good cause. I mean, some of the examples you gave and things we've talked about certainly have to give us pause to wonder about these sorts of things. Where do you see ethics as it relates to technology headed into tomorrow, if you will?
It's going to be central. I mean, it's already been central to the conversations that I've seen today. There's an enormous amount of interest in ethics and technology now because people are seeing how this is placing them in new relationships to governments and corporations. I mean, it is really striking that when the government tried to bug everybody's bedrooms, people complained about that. When someone offered that, well, hey, now my bug will tell you what the weather is, people just...
Yeah, it's acceptable. Not a problem.
Put it into the room. And, I mean, people are gradually waking up to that, and that means that they're having conversations about politics and ethics, and so those conversations, I think, are only going to become more important.
And of course, it's I guess, a whole other thing in terms of ethics involving technology. You mentioned a lot of people are talking about that now. A lot of companies are talking about it simply for liability reasons, it seems, or simply about, oh my gosh, we don't want to get caught because we're hearing these people. We tell our audience all the time, well, is Alexa listening all the time? Well, of course she is, if you will, because that's how you wake her up, is when you call her name, but how would she hear it if she's not listening all the time? Same thing with Google Home, and for that matter, the same thing with Siri and Bixby and the rest of them. It's just those two are the biggies. The ethics become involved as well for the companies. Are we doing the right thing? Of course not. Are we doing things to change for our customers' better interest? Also, of course not, I'm convinced. But then what? Is it just a matter of we've got to be litigious and get these companies to pay to stop it?
I think sometimes people need to be litigious. I do think that's one of the mechanisms that our societies use to try to provide incentive structures to corporations. But I also think we need to be active citizens. We need to be engaged in public debate. We need to be having conversations like this. And at the end of those conversations, we might decide to do something about it. And that is not just sort of shopping more intelligently. It's not just turning the device off. Sometimes it is reimagining what we want our world to look like and taking steps as a society and as a community to try to bring a better world into being.
Rob Sparrow, professor at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. I can see why they invited you to the IFA Plus Summit, because your insights are amazing. Your discussions have opened our eyes in many ways. Thus the reaction from many folks coming out of the IFA Plus Summit saying, that was cool, that was informative, that was neat. And I'd love to get you back on the show. Maybe we could do a phone interview at some point or meet up at another trade show. Glad you're also very involved in the Shift Automotive part of IFA. So stick around. We'll see you over the next couple of days too, but thanks for spending a few minutes with us here.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure, and we'll link you to his website at the monash.edu. Trust me, it's a little bit long. Visit us at intotomorrow.com, and you're a click away from Rob's site, and you can see what the professor and his team are up to on a regular basis. Technology, ethics in technology, something we need to talk more about, and I'm glad that he shed some of that light to help us out. I'm Dave Graveline, bringing you further into tomorrow, more from Berlin, Germany, and IFA here on the Advanced Media Network.